Conversations with Tom. I am here with none other than Ryan Holiday. Dude, thank you for joining me.
Of course.
So this is going to be the hopefully most laid back, and laid back's the wrong word. It's going to be far more informal, as I was explaining before. I want to push my own thinking in real time, which means I may fuck up your flow, which on impact theory, it's all about, I want the guests to get into flow. I want to, like you said, walk them through the book. I want to set them up to get their ideas across in the best possible way for the audience. So that show will continue to do its thing. But what I want to do with this is push my own thinking in real time. Chase things that I'm fascinated by, which some of it will almost certainly be a miss, right? I'm going to go down some rabbit hole and it's going to end up being shit. And we're not going to cut it out. We're like, just going to let it rock. This is going to be unedited. That was the other thing. Impact theory is not, I can't scale it. It takes so much of my time, so much of the team's time, that it was like once a week, if I tried to do any more, the team started having heart palpitations. So I said, all right, let's come up with a new show format, something that requires less than 11 hours of prep on my part and an interminable amount of time on theirs. And, you know, just see where it goes.
See what happens.
And you had asked me a question just a second ago, because I said, I'm violating the number one rule of Perennial Seller, one of your amazing books, which is don't try to do two things at one time, which is precisely what I'm doing. And so you had asked what the two things were, and they are, I am simultaneously trying to build what I'll call the nonfiction side, the social side. So it's me staring directly into a camera and telling people, this is how you think, this is how you act, and you're going to get farther in life than you otherwise would. And then the other side is pure fiction. It's creating comic books and movies and TV shows. And while there is massive amounts of synergy, there's no question that it is not the same audience. So every person that I pour into the nonfiction side, they aren't necessarily backwards compatible to the people on the fiction side. I hope the people on the fiction side are completely compatible the other way, and that it's sort of a graduation system where we capture you emotionally with the fiction, and then hopefully we can graduate you ultimately into the nonfiction.
So I don't think that's one, I very much relate. And two, I'm not sure it's a contradiction. And if I'm remembering what I'm saying in Perennial Seller, I think my argument is don't have two contradictory goals at the same time. So someone goes like, I'm trying to write a work of, you know, literary fiction for fancy people, and I want to be really famous at the same time. Like, or they're like, I want to sell lots of copies, but I want to win lots of awards. And those are, again, not always the same thing. And so you're asking for two separate, what the mistake there is you're pursuing two different outcomes with one product, right? And that's, if not impossible, very difficult. I very much relate to what you're doing because I do all sorts of different types of books, right? So, and there is this hope or this dream that like, so I write these self-help books, you know, Ego's the Enemy, Obstacles the Way. I would have thought like, hey, I write this book Conspiracy, which is like a nonfiction book about how, you know, sort of power operates behind the scenes and it's driven by narrative. I would have thought there'd be like a one-to-one connection. And that book is done well, but it's almost exclusively done well with people who didn't read the other books. And so in a way, one read is disappointment. The other read is that it's actually additive, right? And then I would say both those things are irrelevant because at the end of the day, as an artist, as a creator, as an entrepreneur, although you have to be driven by business and you have to be driven by like success, because if you're not, like the you run out of fuel is in the form of money, but like you do the things that get you out of bed in the morning. Like you don't not work on something because you think it will do well, but you're not interested in it. And conversely, if you're super interested in something, it's usually a mistake to just like shove that away. And you know what I'm saying? Like you got to go where the heart goes.
That is interesting. That's an interesting summation that I didn't expect you to end with. I want to go back to something you said. Okay. So I'm sort of mulling over that notion of you have to go where the heart goes, because I think the real truth of it is you have to have the business acumen. So you said you can't pretend that money doesn't exist. And this is what I find with beginning entrepreneurs, especially because I'm the guy that's out there like, hey, you really need to have a passion. There needs to be a why. Sure. Like I tell the story about starting Quest because I wanted to save my mom and my sister. And so people resonate with that. Yeah. And there's definitely, that is super powerful and very, very true. But if you don't learn how to run a business, if you're not savvy enough to make something profitable, you're really going to fall by the wayside. And so, yes, you need to go where the heart goes. But at the same time, because I get hit up by people all the time that are like, I want to build this audience. I want to help people. And I'm like, you're coming from a beautiful place. But if you don't fucking understand business, like, you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's right. So with my books, like, I think there are things I could do that would make them sell more copies, that it's not that I'm not willing to do because they're marketing. It's more like, I think I could write a simpler, less nuanced book in any one of my books, but I don't think that would be intellectually honest, right?
Meaning you find the way that you write more interesting?
It's both interesting, but also jives with my principles. Like, look, I think The Secret is the most successful self-help book of all time because it tells people what they want to hear, but I think it's utter bullshit, right? Yes. Like, you can make more money telling people what they want to hear rather than giving them what they need. Right. Just like I'm sure there were all sorts of corners you could have cut with Quest that would have made the company more profitable, right, and probably even made the things taste better or sell better, but ultimately been in contradiction with the whole reason you started the company to begin with. So it's like, I became a writer to pursue what's interesting to me, to say what I think is true, to popularize the ideas that I think are important. I'm not going to then go do the opposite of that or only 80% of that because I think I can sell more copies that way. Like, I guess it's just about finding a balance, right? It's like, how successful do you want to be? And what are you willing to do? Just like every athlete could probably go like, look, is there a way I could get away with doping? And is that how I want to win? Yes or no?
It's interesting. I feel like there might be a slightly different fundamental question that people have to ask themselves. Okay. Which is, how do I want to feel about myself when I'm by myself? And I wonder, like, I do not know this man. I've never met him ever in my life, but Lance Armstrong. Yeah. I'm going to guess from the things that I've seen. And again, I do not fucking know him. And if he wants to come on the show, I'd happily have this conversation. But I have a feeling that, like, to him, pushing the boundaries of what the human body can do, even with exogenous substances, like that doesn't matter to him. And I'm guessing that he doesn't lose sleep over that, even if people want him to. Yeah. And so when you look at a lot of either a violation of what most people will say is a problem or a non-violation of what most people will see as a problem, has perchance very little impact on how the person actually feels about themselves. And I would say that how you feel about yourself is ultimately the thing that should be driving your decision making. Yes. You at the end of the day, you have to sleep in your house. Right. You know what I mean? You have to look yourself in the mirror. And Lance is actually a really interesting guy. I've gotten to know him in Austin, and I think what he's told me, I think this is an interesting way to think about it. It's a lesson I've sort of thought about after he told it to me. He was saying that basically, I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, but he was saying this sort of, he's always a competitive person. He's always very driven and always very good at what he did. He was one of the best in the world. And then he gets cancer, and all of a sudden, now he's in a fight, right? Or the fight of his life. And in the fight against cancer, like beating cancer was living, and losing to cancer was dying, right? And he sort of said it was kind of like there was a switch that flipped in his brain, or it was just wires that crossed, where it was like he was perfectly built to beat cancer. But when he walked out from that was maybe some twisting of the wirings, in that winning itself was now living and losing was dying. And so it's like, water boils at 212 and it doesn't boil at 211. And so like the tiny degrees of difference can have massive impact on things. And so I think it's just, you want to know, like, who do you want to be? Where do you want to end up? And then realize that as you're making these decisions that don't seem big or small, just how they can end up taking you in radically different directions. And look, like the whole doping in cycling is such a complicated issue, and it doesn't really work well in our sort of outrage culture to wrap our heads around it. But it's like, oh, okay, like that's something I don't want to make that association in my life, because like I have for me, winning is not simply like, for some people, winning as being an author is selling lots of copies. I want to sell copies. I don't want to be an obscure author that nobody heard of, because you're not having any impact. I don't want to be a person that everyone says they liked but don't actually read. I want to be kind of in the middle, And like for me, the goal is like, do
do people I respect really get a lot out of the books, right? So like at the elitist levels of performance, is the book working and resonating? And what I've just realized, the trade-off to get there is that it doesn't work as well for ordinary people. Like, it's still enough that the books have sold quite well. I make a comfortable living. It's been awesome. But the question is like, am I going to write a book so simple that an NFL coach is like, I can't do anything with this, right, but I might sell 30% more copies to ordinary people. Not that I have a problem with ordinary people, but you know what I mean? It's like deciding who you're doing this thing for is really important, because then just the idea that a number determines success is way too binary and way too simple.
So I want to go back to what you're saying about Lance Armstrong. Okay. That shit is so interesting to me. And so the notion that winning itself is life.
Yeah.
So I think a big reason that a lot of people fail is they're not obsessed, like truly, they're not obsessed about figuring something out. And I'm super curious to see what you think about this, because of the Stoic bent and like your new book, which are we able to talk about the new book?
Of course. No, that's what I'm here.
Right, so stillness is the key, right? Yeah. So the notion of being able to tap into stillness, incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But a little bit of Alexander the Great, of the need to conquer, of the need to win, to be out front, to kill, to like do your thing, man. Like that's how fucking people win, right? Hannibal, I will either find a way or make one. Like when you have that level of obsession, and whether it's, Lance realizing in his battle for cancer that he is just perfectly, and I'm assuming he meant perfectly wired to be cancer, because he won't quit.
Yeah.
He's just got an ability to suffer and endure that your average human does not.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is fucking interesting. And I really feel like if people cannot cultivate that in their life, they won't be able to play at the level that many of them profess to want to play. Now, I'm not obviously not speaking for everybody. Not everybody wants to be at that level, but if you want to play,
this is a sort of perennial question. Can you be world class? Can you be best in the world and be anything else? You know what I mean?
What do you think?
Does it have to ruin you as a human being?
I won't take it that far.
But I don't mean like, do you have to be a monster? But I just mean, can you be singularly focused, or can you have a slightly more balanced life?
What's your answer to that?
Yeah. I think about it a lot. One of the stories I tell in Stillness is the story of Michael Jordan. Clearly, probably the greatest basketball player of all time. Certainly for a generation, the greatest basketball player of all time, done things no one has ever done and probably ever will be able to do again. But when you watch the Michael Jordan Hall of Fame speech and you go, this strategy is not without its costs. And it's not that Michael Jordan it's what you realize is that his obsession was primarily in the way for Armstrong, it's driven by, winning his living. For Jordan, it was clearly like anger is the fuel that he used to achieve his greatness. And I think what we do young people and aspiring people a disservice is we go like, oh, Michael Jordan, successful, angry, you should be angry, or whatever it is. What's pushed off into the future is the cost of that. And you saw that in that Hall of Fame speech. George Raveling told me, he was like, what happened is he shoved all this stuff in the closet, and then the closet blew open in front of the entire world. And it was a wake-up call for him. He said Michael Jordan's much better now, having gone through that speech. That was sort of that was a revealing experience for him in many ways. That he didn't go up there to come off that way. And sometimes you can only do things and see yourself from a distance and go, maybe that's not who I want to be. So I'm not coming at it from a position of judging. I'm just saying like that anger meant that he couldn't enjoy the crowning achievement of his life. And it was clear that even as he was doing all these things, it was what he was that to be great, he'd had to make himself like an open wound. And I guess what I'm interested in is like, is that necessary? And are there other forms of fuel? And Lyndon Johnson once said that like, you got to have that sort of animal instinct, that like killer instinct, but you got to be able to keep it on a leash.
Right.
And I think, so maybe that's one compromise, is just that like, I'm competitive, I want to win, but can I check myself so I'm not just giving myself, I'm very suspicious of giving myself over to anything. And maybe I leave some gains on the table, but I also I'm also preventing catastrophic failure, which so many of these people end up doing. That's not the case for Michael Jordan, but we always want to be careful of the survivorship bias. You see Michael Jordan become the most successful basketball player of all time, driven by anger. What about the guy that blew his opportunity in college, that blew his draft interviews? There's this guy is a player. His name is Ndudi Ebe, and he was drafted by the Timberwolves after Kevin Garnett, like one of the last high school players. And they said, look, you're really good. What we learned with Kevin Garnett is that it takes a little bit of time for a high school player to develop. We want to put you in the developmental leagues for a season. And he was like, nope. And so they cut him, he was like, he had that, like, I'm good enough. I can do it right now. You can't teach me anything. And he plays in Turkey right now. You know what I mean? Like, so we don't hear about guys like that because most of the stories we tell culturally are about when it works out, and we lose sight of when the obsession turns into the Lance Armstrong situation or turns into worse than that situation.
This is what scares me. So I want to, my mission in life, maybe is a better way to say it, is to find an access point for the average person to develop greatness in their life.
Yes.
Okay. So that one requires a definition of what is greatness. And I will define it. There's, I think, a real temptation for people to say, whatever is greatness for you. And I will say that is true of success. I don't think it's true of greatness.
Yeah.
So success is, hey, how do you define it? And you've talked a lot about success for me as freedom. I totally buy into that. It's a super personal thing.
Right.
What I want to do, and I used to back at Quest, I called it mining for astronauts. I really want to find the next crop of extraordinary human talent.
Sure.
Now, for sure, I'm deeply distressed by the importance that intelligence plays and all of that. And I don't quite know where I settle out on that.
Okay.
I kind of
like biologically.
Yeah. So recent science seems to show, I was researching this for my upcoming book. Research seems to suggest that 50% is hardwired and 50% is malleability. Okay. So I'm just going to set aside the hardwired part for now and say that the radical change that you can have in your life with the 50% that is malleable is so extraordinary, even if all you can do is improve yourself 10x, whatever, that focus on that, right? Like doing some 10x thing. But the only way I know how to present all of this to you is through the lens of greatness, of real measurable achievement that we can say we were aiming for this and either we hit it or we didn't. So then I get into the notion of, all right, obsession, and what does obsession look like and how do you begin to balance this stuff? And so my theory around obsession is that most of the, I've just always broken it down 80-20, and was that the Pareto distribution or principle or whatever. So it's probably largely bullshit, but that gets you at least in the neighborhood of reality. Yeah. And for me in my life, the thing that I have found is 80% of my energies can come from something beautiful. The thing that I'm trying to accomplish, the people that I want to help, what I want to build, what I want to create, my own self-improvement, all of that. But there's 20% of the time where I'm just too fucking tired. And I just want to stop. I want to be lazy. I want to give in to sort of base vice instincts, all of that. And in those moments when I'm bone tired, the only thing that gets me out is the rage to win. And in those moments, it is a dark energy. It's an ugly energy, but it is so fucking effective. And looking at science, and I really need to look this up because I've been bullshitting this statistic forever. I have no idea what the real answer, but it's something like 30%. So they take people to get a baseline for pain tolerance. They have you submerge your arm in ice. You leave it in for as long as you can. People pull it out. They get a baseline. Then they take another group of people and they have them submerge their arm. And they say, hey, right at the second where you want to pull it out, I want you to get really angry, yell, scream, cuss, do whatever you need to, but just see if you can leave it in longer. And they do. And they find that people that put themselves in that aggressive, angry state are able to leave it in something like 30% longer. And that feels so true to me, to what I know about the human condition, that in like I keep a list, and it's the list of all the people that told me I would never succeed, that or more importantly, the people that actively want me to fail. And they've made themselves known in various ways through my life. And when I'm really, really tired and I've run out of all the, like, I want to do something awesome for the world. I want to help my wife. I want to feel some kind of way. And that all peters out and I don't have the energy anymore. The thing that keeps me in the game is imagining that person celebrating my defeat. And that gives me new energy. And so the need to balance seems painfully obvious. Like if you allow yourself to steep in the anger and the rage too much, you begin to hardwire for it. It becomes the easiest emotion for you to feel. It is an ugly emotion. It is not fun to stay there for long periods of time, but it's incredibly fucking useful. And so like when I think about no bullshit really teaching people, like you said, I want to give something to people that is real. And when I think about that, if you don't master the 20%, in addition to the 80%, you won't achieve greatness. You might achieve success, but you won't achieve greatness.
Well, I think it's interesting even to say that success and greatness are not necessarily, you can have one and not the other. Ideally, you want both. I think that's important and should be liberating for people. I guess what I'd say, I have a lot of thoughts. So one, to me, one of the most beautiful passages, and I think the most haunting to me in Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is he's like, run down the list of the angriest, the most driven, the most ambitious, the most, I have something to prove to the world people of history. And he goes like, where are they now? He was like, dust or legend, or not even legend. And what he's trying to remind himself is that as powerful as a tool as it may be, ultimately, where does it end up? It ends up where we all end up. He says Alexander the Great and his mule driver are buried in the same ground, right? Like, that's not to say that you should be the mule driver and not Alexander the Great. It's just the point is like, at the end, we all become equal, right? That's that Stoic idea of memento mori. I wear it in a ring on my finger. It's like, I want to be tangibly reminded all the time that separate from what gets you to success or greatness is ultimately ephemeral. The most impact you can have, like not far from me in Austin, there's this national park, dinosaur national monument. You can stand in a footprint left by a dinosaur 110 million years ago in a riverbed. It's crazy. Dinosaur doesn't care. It's fucking dead. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean anything. Like doesn't matter what you build here, how important, how many people you touch. That dinosaur left a greater legacy than you will leave over a long enough time span, right? 110 million years. It's tangible. It's right there in the ground. But in the end, most of us won't even leave that, right? So I think what he's trying to say there is just adding some humility here, right? And then I think that goes to the point of if you're relying on anger to get you over the hump to do something, if you're just in the way that you're relying on adrenaline to lift a car off of a person who's stuck, great. Not good to live your life in an adrenaline-fueled way because eventually your adrenal glands fail and then you have no ability to do that, right? And so as an oomph, as like an extra booster, I get it and probably use it myself. I think the problem is people tell themselves that's how they're doing it, but they're not. The problem with the hey, I'm driven by proving these people wrong strategy, or or I'm going to shove this in their faces, or I'm going to get even with them, is that what I tend to find happens is, so you get there. You did, let's say I became an author to prove to my mom and dad that they underestimated me. Well, you get there and then you don't feel what you expected to feel. You don't feel good, right? And then so instead of going like, okay, I'm going to not do that anymore, you go, your mind, without you even knowing, begins inventing new grudges. So it's like, if the point is the adrenal rush to lift the car off, that's a one-off thing, right? I totally buy into that and agree. I think I think what we have to be careful of is how insidious anger is. Anger is like ego. It's like its main thing is self-preservation. Like anger is not in the business of forgiveness or in letting go. Anger is in the business of anger. And so you let it in and now it's like, but what about that other guy was laughing too, and so it never ends.
Right. Yeah. So I totally buy into that. And for me, it is one of the most dangerous things that you can do. And I actually think about my moral obligation to the people that I'm trying to help. Do I have a moral obligation to lead them down a path that isn't dangerous?
Yeah.
Or do I have a moral obligation to lead them down a path that's effective?
Yes.
And I, for sure, lean on the side of effectiveness. So I'll ultimately judge myself by my ability to take them down a path of effectiveness. But here's what I struggle with. Some people are going to get it. So I always call out like, oh, this is advanced class shit. Because I know that people are really going to struggle. Like, hey, two competing ideas, you're going to have to hold them in your head at the same time. And it gets super weird and to know when to lean on one and not the other. And then experience has taught me that people then oversimplify your message. They cling on to one thing. And so I'm like, fuck, man, when I say something's advanced class, it's usually because it's dangerous. And that if you play with this is, to use a brutally cliche thing, this is like playing with fire, right? Like the chances of you cooking your meat versus getting burned, it's like, I have no idea what you're going to do with it.
And fire is almost like too conservative. It's like you're playing with jet fuel.
Right.
There's a chance it just blows you up, right? Like it's or nitroglycerin. Like it's very fragile. And I totally get that dilemma, because look, my first book is a book about media manipulation. Like the intention of the book is to say, don't do this, or this is bad. But at the same time, I'm also saying this is how it works, right? And so you, at the end of the day, like you can't control what people do with the message. You can only deliver the message, and this goes to what we're saying. The message might reach more people if you didn't put the caveats, if you didn't put the warnings, if you just told people what they wanted to hear, which is an excuse for anger. But you gotta sit with yourself at night, and you gotta have your own standards. And so ultimately, you have to know that you put it out there in a way that you felt was right at the time you put it out. And then what people do with it, ultimately, these are consenting, responsible adults.
Yeah. I mean, one certainly hopes that they are consenting, responsible adults. That to me is really interesting. What's something that has surprised you? So you do the Daily Stoic, which is really interesting, and I love them.
Thank you.
I wondered if people respond to ones you don't expect them to respond to, or if you get nervous at all about which ones end up being really popular.
So the Memento Mori thing has been like of an unexpected vein, because for myself too.
Explain to people what that is.
So Memento Mori is this idea. It just means remember death, or remember your immortality. And I think it's not only one of the most powerful themes in all of ancient philosophy, specifically Stoicism, but in basically all of ancient art as well. Like the most beautiful painters used to paint pictures of skulls and dancing skeletons or decaying bodies. And so this imagery of the inevitable decay, the entropy of life, is this timeless theme that basically goes all the way up to modern art, and then it's just like weird ass shapes and stuff. So we stopped using art as a tool to remind us of human primal things and started using it as a status symbol. You know what I mean? And so what the Stoics are, so much of meditations and Seneca's writing is just talking about how easy it is to forget that you'll die, or to have the wrong attitude about death. One of my favorite things from Seneca, he goes like, do not think that you're moving towards death. He was like, every second that passes is death. So don't think about it as like, oh, I'm dying in the future and I should be prepared for that. Think about the fact that we're dying every day. That you're just...
Why is that better?
It's just a reminder. It's not like death is this thing in the future, so I'm going to dick around today. It's that like that hour that I spent forever on the couch, I died 1 hour of my death. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And his point is that so many people think that there's life and death, but there are ways of living that are essentially a form of being dead. And that this is in fact how most people die, or most people live. There's this sort of haunting, messed up story in Seneca. One of the emperors is sort of like walking down this row of condemned prisoners, and the prisoner is pleading for his life. Please don't kill me. And the emperor looks at him and he's like, you think you're alive? Because this man's horrible way of living was already death, And so that just, I think it so resonates with people because it's so the opposite of how modern life is set up. People die in hospitals far from our house. who spends time with old people? We are so segregated, even by age, right? There's been so many medical advancements that death doesn't feel random. It feels like it's something your fault. That, like, if you eat healthy and you're a good person, obviously you'll live a long time. And on average, you will. But that doesn't mean that non-smokers don't get lung cancer all the fucking time, and you can't be one of those people. That doesn't mean that people don't get hit with tree branches, and die, or that doesn't mean that countries don't go to war for no reason, and lots of people, like, life is tragic, and it always has been for all of human history. And so that's definitely, I think, the most powerful one. And it's something I keep on my desk. So I wear this ring. It's like a reminder, but I have, I bought it online. It's a chunk of a tombstone. And it like from some, I don't know how this came to be. I hope nobody stole it, but it's from like an old Victorian grave. So a couple hundred years old. And it just it just has the word dad on it. And that's
so fucking interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I want to start asking people what is some weird shit that they have. That is so interesting, especially knowing your views on death and being a dad recently.
Yeah. And so it's like, look,
crazy.
This guy was a father.
Did you seek out the word dad?
I was looking for something like that. And when I found it, and I was like, that's it. That's the reminder that I want to have all the time.
Fuck, that one really hit me. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
The word dad, that it's an actual tombstone.
Because what you're thinking about is what that person meant to other people.
Yes.
And that this is something clearly people identify. He that was part of his identity, and he's not here. And not only is he not here, I don't even fucking know his name. Right. Nobody does. Not only does nobody know his name, but at some point after his death, even the ground he was buried in, like, suffered an earthquake, or somebody stole it. Like, so it's just, there's a humility in that. And I think a reminder to be present, right? Like, so when let's say I'm working at my desk and I'm writing, and my son is almost 3, he comes running and he's like, Dad, look at this. That's like I'm going to get this writing done because I'm important, or it's important to me. But I am not going to ignore this thing. I'm not saying I'm going to quit my work and not focus on it at all, but I am not going to ignore this moment to be this thing that's important to me. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I think that gets, I want to derail on that, but first I want to address like the notion of death, memento. Do not let me forget to come back to your son coming in, because that's actually really fucking interesting.
And we talked about that before.
But I want to talk about, so I have an evolving sense of what my relationship to death should be. So for a very long time, it was patently obvious to me that I was going to die, but that we're living in a period where it is conceivable that we'll be able to hit escape velocity from a health perspective, and that by the time we're 80, 90, if we're able to live that long, that they can add a year and a day to every year that we live, or whatever.
So, or you just live a lot longer than humans have conceived of life as being.
Correct. So I thought, okay, that's interesting to me, because I want to live my life in such a way where my limited amount of time does not impact the size of my dreams. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a denial of death. It was just kind of a cool escape valve for me to, even as I got older, to continue to have big dreams that, sort of by any stretch of the imagination would probably go on beyond me. But because tomorrow was never guaranteed anyway, even when I was 16, that there's only that the sort of false, or maybe a better way to think of it is from an actuarial table standpoint, you're probably going to live long enough for you to have that 40-year dream, or that 6-year dream, or whatever. So because of that, you have these long-ranging dreams. And I felt like because I had long-ranging dreams, I was able to do some pretty extraordinary things, but only because I was thinking so long-term. So, okay, as I get older, I don't want to stop having these long-term dreams. Yeah. So I really allowed myself to soak in the notion of, hey, you might live forever. So keep having these big long-range dreams. Now, hearing enough people talk about memento mori or whatever, I started thinking, all right, people that I really respect are telling me that I need to really think closely about the notion of dying. So I thought, okay, let me really stop and inspect how that would impact me. What does that change in terms of the way that I live, or how I perceive life, or whatever. And so far, I will say, because I'm already like, it is at the absolute core of my being to only do things that matter, to love deeply, to connect to the people that I love, to not waste time, all that. Like I personally don't need that reminder.
Yeah.
Many people do, and it's very useful for that. That isn't the reminder that I need. I find that it's actually, it feels important to acknowledge the inevitability currently of my death. But at the same time, I find that now I have to fight harder to have long range plans. And I don't like the way that feels.
So it's seemingly there's a contradiction between being present and doing or planning big things. But I'm not sure that there is. I don't know exactly how to solve for it, but let's look at the evidence, right? Marcus Aurelius. Here's a guy, he's reminding himself of how ephemeral the emperors who came before him were. He's reminding himself of the inevitability of death. He's saying over and over again the importance of being present, not being driven by anger. We can't say like that this guy didn't accomplish incredible things, right? Like that because of that, he just stayed in bed all day. I think what he's saying is like, let's do the right thing for the right reason. You look at Seneca, same thing, talking over and over again about the death, about the inevitability of death, the meaninglessness of posthumous fame, etc. And yet still sits down and writes these essays that continue to be read by millions of people 2,000 plus years after his death. I think what it's about is about stripping out the low-grade anxiety or denial or whatever we have and being able to focus everything in that moment. So when Seneca's saying like, you will die, today could be the last day of your life, he's not saying quit what you're doing and go have an orgy or go shoot up heroin just to see what it's like. He's saying live today like a complete day. So like as I worked on Stillness is the Key, it was something I was thinking about a lot. I was like, okay, I could die before this book gets published. What happens to me? Does someone finish it? Does it get published? Whatever? Does it sit in a drawer? None of that's really my concern. Nor is it in my control, right? Even if I write in a will, exactly. Nabokov, I think, wrote very clearly, like, destroy my manuscripts after my death.
Really?
Yeah, and lots of authors have done this. And nobody listened. Kafka, same thing. We only know about these works because they would be upset that we know who they are.
Right.
So what do I control? What I do control is, did I do everything I could today, right? Did I is the book complete as of today? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it as complete up until the point I was able to complete it? So I go, the first 2/3 are the book that it could be as of today. That's what I do. Does that make sense?
It does, but I don't know that it hits me emotionally. So let's try to unpack that a little bit. So if you're saying like, hey, I'm going to do my best and I'm going to be present, which we actually didn't address, and I don't think is a self-evident realization when one thinks about their death, which would be interesting to hear your thoughts around why that is your association. I begin to think about, so if I were writing a book, first of all, I'm such a process writer that I would be the type that's like, bury the fucking manuscript. Don't ever let it out. Yeah. People would have they just wouldn't believe how scandalously bad my early drafts of anything are. So I wouldn't think of it in any other way than the following. Did I sincerely pursue making this great today? Yes or no?
That's I totally agree. That's what it's about. He's saying like, live every day as a complete day. And then when you wake up tomorrow, you're grateful because you get a second day. It's like, you don't walk up to the plate and swing at those pitches and go, oh, I'll get it next time. You go like, this is game 7. This is
fucking interesting. So I still struggle with anxiety, but my anxiety used to be debilitating.
Yeah.
And one of the things that got me out of that was to say, there's no such thing as performance. There's only practice.
Yeah.
So literally the exact opposite of what you're saysaying right now. There is no game 7. Even if it was game 7, I would have to tell myself, hey, this is just practice. And if you fuck this up, no worries. You're going to learn something from this.
Here's, I think that this is like a life-changing assumption that I came to about philosophy. I'm not sure exactly where I came to it, but it cracked open a whole thing for me. And maybe it was in the 48 Laws of Power. People go like, but the laws contradict each other. different situations call for different perspectives,
Correct.
right? They're not,
So
life is fucking complicated. Life is a paradox, right? And so I think what you go is like, sometimes you need to be told, this moment is game 7. And sometimes you go, it's not even, none of this even matters. You go back and forth, right?
This is so important. Yes.
And also let's think about what philosophy actually is, because now we have these pretentious academics who are like, this is the theory of the universe. You know, what Epictetus or Seneca or Marcus Aurelius is doing is answering questions in the way that, like, if I looked at all the Q&As you've done, I'd be like, Tom, half your answers contradict each other. That's because you're talking to Steve, and over here you're talking to Susan. And then maybe if you were talking to Susan 3 weeks later, you give a totally different answer because it was a different question or because she's changed, right? Like, different things required. So if you're curing anxiety, how can we zoom out and get a different perspective? If you're wasting time, or if you're dwelling in the past, then we want to do, you just do it differently to get the different perspectives that give you the tools to be able to move forward. And ultimately, and I'm not trying to do this to plug my book, ultimately what we're trying to do is get to a place of stillness and clarity and focus so we can be 100% locked in whatever we're doing. So that's what this is all about. And sometimes you're flashing forward, sometimes you're looking to history for perspective. Sometimes you're emptying your mind entirely. It's just like every situation's got different handles, and you grab onto the right one at the right time.
So, wow, you just put words to something that I think is so incredibly important. And are you able to define perspective? Because to me, so the book that I'm writing is essentially about how to craft, and I don't like the word perspective, even though it's probably the closest thing.
Okay.
But the ability to craft a perspective, the ability to at will change your perspective is critically important. And I think that perspective is the very thing that holds people back. My realization that the people in the inner cities that were working for me at Quest, that they had a bad perspective that was going to blunt their ability to have an extraordinary life.
Yeah.
That realization is why impact theory exists. So like that whole notion of perspective being this incredibly meaningful thing is at the center of my philosophy and my drive and all that. Are you able to define what a perspective is?
There's a German word, Umwelt, and it basically means, like, a dog has a different Umwelt than a human. And I would argue that a champion at this sport versus an egotistical loser who won't get off their couch, they have different Umwelts. They have different experiences of reality, and the ability to control that, or to it's like, you're cranking the thing on the binoculars. That's what you want to be able to cultivate. And when you look at what the Stoics are doing, it's sometimes they're zooming way in and going like, just look at the thing immediately in front of you. Don't extrapolate out to the whole. That's what's intimidating you. And then other times they're like, look at the world from above and how puny even the Roman Empire is compared to other things. And they're in some cases in the same moment doing both of those. And it's just realizing that how we look at the world is, the world is objective, but how we look at it determines what we're going to be able to do to it. Epictetus says, it's not things that upset us, it's our opinions about things, right? And so realizing like, oh, okay, the world is objective. My opinion is what determines everything. And by opinion, he means judgments, right? He says it's not things that upset us, it's our judgment about things. So it's really maybe judgment's a better word than perspective.
Well, let's go back to the notion of, so I've heard it pronounced Umwelt. I don't know which is right. Umwelt, whatever.
Yeah.
So to define, at least, and I don't know if this is the official Merriam-Webster definition, but a big part of the need to define an Umwelt or to have a word for it is take birds or fish, right? They actually perceive data from the world differently. So a shark can detect electrical signals, and you can actually fool a shark into thinking that a metal plate is a flopping fish because you just have the plate emanate an electrical signal. And it can't help but interpret it that way. But we would not notice anything. So we don't know that,
but like, isn't it interesting that we just assume sharks are looking and smelling?
Right.
That's how we looking, smelling, and hearing. We just go, everyone must be perceiving those senses. It's not, we can't even think about how a bat perceives reality driven by radar.
Right.
Yes.
100%. Yeah. And so I think something that drives my very understanding of the world, all of my philosophies, everything that I teach is all about we are humans experiencing life through a biological system. And that biological system has its own Umwelt. It has limitations. We see only a certain spectrum of light. We hear only a certain spectrum of sound. Like we can't experience Wi-Fi signals like they're, or maybe we do, but on a cellular level. And so we have no conscious awareness of it. So it's like really getting down to, okay, if you know that your Umwelt is limited and you know that you're confined in this world and that your brain actually has a region of it that says not just what is happening, but how you feel about what is happening, the deep limbic system, right? Your brain actually processes things through the lens of, is this good or bad, right? That you can knock out that part of the brain and cause people massive problems because once they don't have an emotion about it, they can't even decide what they want for lunch. It's fucking crazy. So wrapping your head around, okay, I am this, I love the notion of the elephant and the rider. Okay, so who is the rider? I'm not even going to talk about that right now. I'm just going to say you're a rider. Your elephant is the biological system. And once you understand what motivates that elephant to move, to rage, to run, to hunger, sex, sleep, whatever, then you can begin to control it more effortlessly. And whether that's to pursue stillness and or whether that is just understanding your own motivations and desires, I think is incredibly important. Where I get freaked out is that people have no sense of the elephant. They have no sense that the elephant is controlled by its Umwelt. They have no sense that, like, okay, you do have a limited number of inputs coming in a limited number of ways. But even within that, there's so much degree of like interpretation that you can take control of, that you can begin to decide how you see your world. And once you decide how you're going to see the world, it will hardwire over time if you obsessively focus on that, so that you get a neurochemical response. Humans move away from pain, they move towards pleasure. So now you're changing what gives you pleasure. You're choosing or changing what gives you pain. And so you're able to steer the elephant. You made a face that says you're not sure you believe that.
No. I'm just thinking, yes.
Okay. So that to me, like, once you understand that, then it's like, okay, you can begin to control. Wrong word. You can begin to navigate more intelligently your way through life because you have some end goal.
Yes.
You begin to hardwire pleasure and pain in a way that is going to move you towards that. Now, I don't think you have complete freedom over what you can hardwire, but there's, going back to that 50-50, there's a massive amount that you can manipulate in that to go in a direction that makes sense based on your goals.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And look, I think an interesting thing you realize when you have kids is you go like, oh, this kid is acting this way because he's really tired. And that how he's acting in this situation is not a reflection of him. It's a reflection of environmental habit, things like that. Like he didn't go down for his nap. That's why he's yelling. He's upset. He says that it's because he wants his toy. Really, he wants to eat, but he doesn't know that that's what he wants. And then having the humility to go like, not only are we all basically just big children, but most of us have an inner child inside of us that, is responding to some childhood trauma that we have that is motivating and steering a lot of, like, you're attracted to this person because they remind you of this other person, or you repeat this pattern where you end up frustrated or upset or, in pain because that's a trauma that's familiar to you and you're just enacting. And so realizing that we're sort of pulled by these forces lets you, I think, or hopefully go, oh, I'm not mad. I'm tired. You know what I mean? Or go, I think this is what would make the world a better place. Go, this person who I don't know, who's rude to me in the supermarket, is not a bad person. They're just responding to one of these forces, right? And this also, I think, allows us to be more forgiving of people who are in jail, people who have failed, people who are not successful. You go, oh, all these things are contributing, but you have the ability, just like you can bring a shelter dog. We go, oh, you can't you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can't teach your old dog new tricks. But if you got a dog from a shelter, you could teach it to sit very quickly. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like fresh for both of you. And the environment has changed and the situation has changed. And that, like, it's just silly to write other people off or to write yourself off, or to do, what do they call it? The attribution fallacy, where we attribute because of one piece of behavior or one flash observance, we attribute an entire understanding about who that person is or what they're capable of because we saw them yell at someone or we saw them be nice to someone and we don't realize that actually they're a serial killer. Do you know what I mean? Like it's all very complicated.
That escalated quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what you just said. That's super interesting. And I think this is very true. The problem isn't that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. The problem is you can't teach your old dog new tricks. And I assume in that analogy, you're saying like it might be hard for you to change your own mind, but if you could step outside or have somebody come in from the outside, you could even be very easily retrained. Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. That's why when people undergo a trauma or they find out they have cancer or they move to a new city, suddenly a whole bunch of things that weren't possible before become possible. Or I think this also explains why momentum is so valuable because it's changing. Suddenly you think you're capable of something that you're no more or less capable of before, but now you've earned a little confidence or you see yourself differently and then suddenly everything changes.
That's really interesting. Go down that path because I think that what you're calling momentum, what I think most people would refer to in that scenario as confidence, is one of the most important things for people in business, probably in life, but I always think about it in the business context, for them to be able to create that momentum. One, how do you create that momentum? Why does it matter so much?
Well, so I just hear from lots of people who want to write books, right? There'll be someone, they're like, hey, I'm, a super successful CEO of X, or, I've done this for, like, I've been a professional athlete the last 10 years, and I want to become, a motivational speaker or something. And they go like, help me make a book. And I go like, why are you starting with the hardest thing? Like, write one tweet, or one article. Like, you know what I mean? Do one, like it. The idea that you should just fast forward all the way to the end without building the process to get there. Like, to me, that's what momentum is. That's what you will write a better book if you've gotten reps earlier in the thing. But people just want the outcome. They don't want the process. And so I think, it's like if you were trying to lose weight, people are like, I got to change everything. And it's probably like, James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habit. Like, what's the smallest unit of change that you can make? Because you can build on that. And in writing, we say something similar where it's like, you can edit crappy pages and turn them into good pages. You cannot edit pages that don't exist, but people are paralyzed by the idea of having something perfect, or something that lives up to their standards. And so they don't start.
Yeah, Seth Godin talks about, like, people always come to him and say, oh, I'm a terrible writer. I can never do that. And he's like, awesome. Let me see your terrible pages.
Right.
And he was like, they never have any. And he was like, they have this belief that they're not good, but they're not even putting in the work to actually get better and improve.
Yes.
Which, going back to that whole notion of perspective, your perspective is going to determine what you pursue. So it's what I call the only belief that matters. The only belief that matters is that you think you can actually get better, that you think by putting in the energy and the effort, that will be rewarded with an improvement in your skill set.
Yeah. Just what I say is, if you don't believe you can do something, you almost certainly cannot do it. But just because you believe you can do something doesn't mean you can do it, right? And so when Churchill is saying that perfection can be spelled paralysis with the word paralysis, I think he's not saying that you shouldn't try to be really, really, really good. So like it's a very subtle perspective shift. It's like, oh no, I'm approaching perfection, but I understand that perfection is impossible. Right. So then you're like, oh, I'm getting better. That now progress is possible. But if you're like, my end goal is to be perfect, you've essentially, it's a tricky thing, because what you're really doing is giving yourself an excuse not to start because you know the thing is impossible. Right. Like you can lose weight. You cannot get taller. Right. So if you go, my goal is to grow a foot this year. And then if I checked in with you a year later, I'd be like, what'd you do? You'd be like, nothing, because it's not possible. But if I said, hey, your goal is to lose 20 pounds, there's at least things you can do to get there.
Well, here's the good news. You actually could get a foot taller. You know about the bone breaking techniques that they use on people that have dwarfism and stuff?
No.
You didn't know about this?
No.
This is fucking crazy, man. So this comes down to why I always I tell people, look, human potential is nearly limitless. Now, I used to say it's limitless.
Yeah.
But people just
Again,
start pushing
very
back
subtle
on
perspective
fucking
shift.
dumb shit, right? Well, you want to talk perspective. Like if your perspective is such that you're going to waste your time pushing back on somebody who's saying that things are, that human potential is limited. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
So act as if. But my thing is the very reason that I know that the law of averages says that some massive percentage, is it 20, is it 30%? They legitimately fall below what I'll call minimum requirements. They're not going to be able to make change in their life.
Yeah.
And I think the US military won't.
It's like 40% of the male population. It's like a disgusting amount.
They won't bring on people that have lower than 83 IQ.
Oh, I was just going to say that is a more loaded. I was responding to like 50% of the population does not even qualify to be in the military.
Is it really that high?
It's somewhat intelligent. It's a very large number, but it's like just being overweight.
Right.
Like they won't take you if you weigh over a certain amount. And you're like, the job that was supposed to be, I'm not saying the military is the lowest, but the military was supposed to be the ultimate equality of opportunity.
Right.
Like they're like, we'll take anyone and turn them into excellence. And then they're like, but these people haven't even gotten to zero. You know what I mean? They're at like -50 and you got to get to 0 for us to work our magic.
Wow.
That's really
I didn't realize that they had weight requirements.
Yeah. You couldn't just enlist in the Marines if you weigh 500 pounds.
Actually, I did sort of vaguely know that, but I thought that was for more elite. Do you know David Goggins?
Yeah.
So they told him, hey, you have to lose 100 pounds or whatever in like 4 weeks or some absurd amount of time. And the fact that he does it is just insanity.
Yeah.
So going back, so I used to tell people that, your human potential is limitless and people would push back on the dumbest shit. And the reason that I would say that is I was so worried that people would assume they fell into like, oh, what I want to do is the thing that can't be done or whatever. And my thing is, look, if you act as if anything can be done, you're actually better off, even though I know it's not true. That is definitively a lie.
Sure.
But if you act as if it were true, you're much less likely to make the mistake of not trying something that actually is possible. So I'll give a quick example. The bone breaking.
Yeah.
So you can go in and if you break the bone and then separate it like a centimeter, some very small increment, the bone will actually grow back together. Yeah. Then you break it again, it grows back together and again and again and again. And people that have dwarfism, they can actually, I don't know what the upper limit is, but let's say it's got to be close to a foot. It's pretty crazy. Okay. Someone just did an AMA on Reddit about, hey, I just grew a foot in the last 2 years or something doing that technique. So it's fucking crazy. The number of things that you can do that people just assume you can't. There was another one. I had this guy on, can I remember his name? He was on Impact Theory. Neuroscientist. I'm blanking on his name right now. I'm so sad. He was so cool. Israeli guy, really interesting. And he was doing some studying and he basically did a sort of a technique of brain scanning that if you sort of carried it out to its logical conclusion, like it could record dreams. And so he publishes a paper on it. Somebody calls him in the middle of the night and says, so are you saying that you can record dreams? And he's like half asleep. He's fucking exhausted. And he ends up saying, well, yeah, I guess you could. And then the next day, the headline reads, neuroscientist says that you can record dreams.
Yeah.
And he panics and he's like, I'm going to get kicked out of academia. Like everyone's going to realize I'm a quack. Fuck. And he's trying to rescind it and it just won't go away. And for a year, it just runs out of control. And people are saying that, oh my God, this is possible. And he's trying to retract it. Nobody will let him retract it. And he has all this anxiety about it. And he's really freaking out that it's going to end his career. And then finally it dies down and he just sort of closes the door on it. And then like a year later, this Japanese researcher publishes a paper about how they recorded dreams. And he was like, what the hell? And the guy says, oh, because of you saying that you were already doing it, I just assumed that it could be done. And so I started doing it. And so he says that the ultimate lesson he took away was not to say something is possible when you believe it's not possible. He said the lesson I learned was not to say something is impossible before you really go out and prove that it can't be done.
Look, and it's so interesting because people think because of my stuff in Stoicism that I'm like somehow pessimistic or resigned or like the Stoics are very clear on this too. I mean, one of my favorite passages in Marcus Aurelius, he goes, if it's humanly possible, assume you can do it also. So it's the same thing. It's just being realistic doesn't mean you're being pessimistic necessarily. It tends to be that way for a lot of people, but if you have a good sense of what is actually literally possible, or you've studied history enough to see just the magnificent things human beings are capable of doing, and how regularly they disprove our assumptions about things, you do have you don't go around thinking like, oh, I have very little agency. You know what I mean? You actually have the sense that like, actually you can sort of change the world or change yourself at any moment.
And what do you think that process looks like? Like, how malleable do you think we really are? Like, I think we can change our values, change the wiring of our brain, and change the neurochemical response we have. I laid that out earlier. Yeah. Like, how far do you think that we can go with this?
I mean, I'd push back with what you're saying is like, why don't we just assume we can go an unlimited amount? Do you know what I mean? Like people, I think people spend a lot of time trying to like disprove like whether self-help works or, it's like, is it hurting, or whatever. I think people like, I'll give you an example, and you mentioned it briefly, but like people are like, oh, let's see how inheritable intelligence is, or certain races, smarter than other races. And I get from an academic perspective, I'm a free speech guy. So I'm like, you should pursue anything you want. The scientific method should take you where it takes you. We should be responsible with all things, but like, I don't think really anything should be off limits in terms of like what we study. Theodore Roosevelt, this great line, someone was talking about how men were smarter than women or something. And he was like, even if that's true, do you know how many men I meet that are much smarter than other men? You know what he's like? Right. No, there's, what's the IQ difference between us? It doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't. How many people have you hired that were not bright, but they wanted the job 500 times more than the person who was 5 points smarter than them? So, and these things, they matter at such. They really only they really only become statistically significant at massive scale. So even if you're hiring at the scale of the US military or hiring at the scale of Google, IQ points matter so fucking little. And what are you going to do? Ultimately, what are you going to do with this information? And so I get you think about it because you're teaching people these things, but I sometimes people go like, are these skills taught or are they natural? And I go, I don't fucking know. You know what I mean? But like, I'm going to work under the assumption that I can get better at them because observably in my own life, I've gotten better at them. Do you know what I mean? And that's enough.
Yeah. It's this is the pulsating, energetic core of what I want to do in the world. And it all comes from what you just said, which is people look at me, the after photo, and assume that this was obvious when I was young. Yes. And it was not. Right. And nothing about where I've ended up was apparent to my mother, to my best friend, to my father-in-law. Like nobody. Right. Expected that this is what I was going to do. My best friend in high school recently told me, oh yeah, I just assumed you were going to marshmallow your way through life. That is a direct quote. That was my best friend, somebody who loved and cared about me and wanted me to succeed. Right. But just based on everything he knew about me, that just wasn't the path that I was on. And so my life has changed so radically. And I feel like, whoa, there were a few key moments, a few key people that I met that gave me a few key pieces of information. And that ended up impacting the course of my entire life. Yeah. And so out of excitement, more than anything else, quite frankly, I want to give those same moments to other people and see the direction that their life goes. And I get it. Not everybody's going to do something with it, but I so believe in the core ability to grow.
No, I think we're saying the same thing. I'm pushing back. Like people go like, I've been reading this paper and I think we live in a computer simulation. Right. And it's like, cool. What the fuck are you going to do with this information? Right. You still have to do what you're ever going to do today. Right. And so I think people can get obsessed with they're actually doing the opposite. You're looking at these studies to find what is possible and to find hope and to find room for improvement, almost to explain your own anomalous success, right? So you can sprinkle that. Obama used this phrase. He said, successful people need to not feel like they did it entirely on their own, but that was part of a larger thing. And then they need to find ways to sprinkle that stardust on other people. That's what you're doing. That's wonderful. I think some people, maybe because they're either supporters of big government, very patronizing government, or because they're, pessimists, or nihilists. They want to look to this information and use it as an excuse for reducing human agency, for telling people that the game is rigged, for telling them that it doesn't matter how hard you try. You know what I mean? Like they're using it as a way to limit potential.
I'm so aggressively in the opposite direction. Right. So to answer your earlier question about like why I look at this or what does it matter, I have so much fear that people turn off an empowering message because they can smell the bullshit. So go back to The Secret.
Yeah.
The Secret is actually half really powerful, but it's half such utter bullshit that, and people are likely to gravitate to the part of just think about things and you're going to get them. Okay. Now, when I select guests to be on the show, dude, I really, really live in fear of undermining my own sort of holistic message of you really can do this by having people that come on and say like, if you use the word fucking quantum to mean anything other than physics, like, it makes my skin crawl because I think that you're going to lead people down a path of where they will miss something truly transformative because they try the easy thing first, which is probably the more bullshitty answer. Yeah. It doesn't work. They find that it's bullshit. They sour on the whole thing, or people that they respect look at it, hear the fluff, the bullshit, whatever, and they're like, that's all garbage. Sure. And so what I want to do is, I really believe that there are times where you have to lie to yourself because I think people are so unable to accurately assess their abilities that there are going to be times where I will actively encourage you to lie to yourself because I think you're more prone to think negative shit about you. Okay. And then on the other hand, talk about holding two competing ideas in your head. You have to be a fucking slave to the truth. You have to know what is real. And so my thing is, I'm trying to figure this stuff out so that if what I really want to do is not bullshit, I actually want to help people change their lives. Okay. Yeah. So I actually want to do that. Then I need to know what the fuck works and what doesn't. So my whole thing about 50% isn't malleable and 50% is, maybe that's wrong. I hope it's wrong. I want it to be that 100% is malleable. Nothing would make me happier than that truly we are blank slates. I will say that my experience does not bear that out. Yeah. The science does not seem to bear that out, but I don't give a shit. Like if they tell me it's you're 99% just carved in stone and 1% malleable. Great, because whatever is real, I've seen it play out in my own life. I don't give a shit what the percentages are. I want to know, oh, it's 1%, cool. I'm just not going to waste time bullshitting about what's not real. And I'm going to fucking focus in on how to tell you how to make the most of that 1%. So my thing is, I just need to understand it so that I can empower people. Because here's what I know about myself currently today, as of the moment that we're recording this. I have a 2-hour declining arc of influence. If you're with me, dude, which is why I have a guy that works out of this house. He's not my fucking employee, but he works out of this house. He's an independent contractor, has his own fucking business. He used to be my employee. And he was like, dude, when I'm around you, I feel like I can do anything. And then when I left Quest and he stayed, he was like, I started to lose that sense that I could accomplish anything. So I was like, come fucking work out of the house. I don't give a shit. He comes to team lunch. We buy him lunch, like all that shit. Like I understand that if he's in the environment, if he's around me or other people that are around me all the time, he will do more with his life, right? We are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So getting him in that environment. So I'm not okay with that. Just because I recognize that I have a 2-hour declining arc of influence today does not mean that I'm okay that is as good as I ever get. Yeah. So I'm fucking trying to figure out for real, like what do I need to say or do to burrow into somebody to be able to change and influence them in such a profound way that even if they never recognize that it's me, like, because a huge part of my theory is that I need to tell them stories. Yeah. I need to give them movies, TV shows, comic books, video games, whatever, that embed this empowering ideology in their mind and, ends up playing itself out. But that's why, like, I'm obsessed with this shit.
Of course. You wanted me to remind you to go back to the thing I was saying about my son interrupting me.
Dude, you're my hero. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a flip side to that coin, which is, and you were saying it, but now I want to talk about how it actually plays out in real life. Okay. That what you're doing is important enough to keep doing. And if your son, which he will, by the way, if you continue to let him interrupt you, he's going to do it and do it and do it. How do you know where to draw the line?
I would say it's, most of the time it's like, so if the question is like, how do you sort of balance an obsession with your work and the desire to be good and present for your family?
Yes.
Well, first off, you design a life in which these things are in conflict as rarely as possible. So I don't rarely work at my house when it's possible for him to interrupt me, right? So I'm not going to put myself in a position where these two things are conflicting and I have to choose. I'm going to take him to daycare. I'm going to go to my office and I'm going to sit there uninterrupted for a very extended period of time. And then when I'm done, I'm going to be done, right? That's how you mostly want it. I'm not necessarily referring to I'm finishing the conclusion of a new book and I've built a chaotic life where interruptions can intervene at any time. It's more like, okay, I'm responding to this email from this person. It is important. I'm going to do it. But in 10 years or 50 years or 5 minutes, when I have a little distance from it, which one of those things do I value more? This total stranger who sent me an unsolicited thing that I'm now having to back out? Or is it the fact that my son wanted to show me how his train works? Do you know what I mean? And what ultimately fills me with more happiness, what ultimately provides that sort of stillness or contentment that allows me to go back to my actual work and perform at a better level. Do you know what I mean? And so that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's like, the point is when I got a great, Russ Roberts is one of my favorite writers. He's this brilliant economist. He wrote this book, How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life. He did like a spin on Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. He just listed his rules. And one of his rules is he's like, always take your child by the hand when they offer it. Meaning, if your child reaches out to you, like your kid says, I want to go to the park, and you're saying, but I was going to do this other less important thing, and you take their hand when they offer the hand, because it's so rare. You don't get that much time. It's. I think the point is just like, it's not put them first above all things, but it's don't actively reject opportunities for connection, because at the end of your life, those are the things that really matter to you. There's a great writer, I'm forgetting his name. He won a bunch of Pulitzer Prizes, but he basically said when he had and I know you disagree with this because we've talked about it, but I think it'd be interesting to discuss. He said when he wrote his first book, it was the sort of toast of town, and he was at a party, and a very well-known writer came up to him and said, whatever you do, don't have kids. Every kid you have is a book you won't write. And he said that really hit me, and I struggled with it a long time. And then he's like, as I sit here now writing this book, which was a book about fatherhood, looking at my 3 children, he goes like, I would take that trade was 1,000% worth it. I think they're in less conflict than people think, but I would definitely I'm proud of all my books. I intend to write many more books, but I have 3 equal priorities in my life. My priority is to write many books, to stay married, and to be a good husband and to be a good father. Those are my 3 things. I think they're not, it's not one is higher than the other. It's they're all 3 at the top. And I think the better husband I am, the better headspace I am in as a writer, the more supported I am as a writer, the better father I am, the more I feel good about myself, the more contented I feel, the more I learn about the human experience. You know what I mean? They're all feed into each other. And I just think it's unfortunate that we've come to not saying everyone should have kids, because not everyone should have kids, but I'm saying it's very sad that we think that greatness is the same as entering the priesthood, which means you have to forsake all other worldly things, which, by the way, when you really look at the history of religion, is that's not even in the Bible. It's not like Jesus was like, don't get married. There's even pretty strong evidence. This isn't like Da Vinci Code stuff. There are other takes on the Bible that Jesus was married. Was it a virgin birth? No, his mom had sex with a guy. The point is,
I can feel the hate mail already.
Yeah, the point is, relationships are not at odds with serenity, with peace, with greatness. To me, and I think students of Eastern religion either don't know this or they gloss right over it. The saddest part of Buddha's trajectory is when he walks out on his wife and child to pursue enlightenment. To me, that is antithetical to enlightenment. It is inherently a contradiction.
That's interesting. It's interesting that you think that I would disagree with any of that. I don't think I disagree with a single word you said, other than that when I look at my own life,
yes,
I may just, I guess, fall easily into the camp of not everybody should have kids. And I think when people hear that sentiment, they think, oh, you would be a bad father. I think I would be an extraordinary father.
Yeah.
I just don't have more interest in that than I have in continuing to live the life that I'm living now. So when I think about,
and that may change, right? You don't know.
For sure. And trust me, I've had in the back of my mind, oh, well, if I, wanted to adopt or something, I do worry that like at some point you're just too old for it to be interesting. Certainly interesting for the kid where there'd just be such a gulf between where you're at physically that you wouldn't be able to play properly. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But, if time were infinite, there's no question I would have children.
Sure.
Because then there would be no need to choose. But in every day, I'm already at the point where there are more things that I'm passionate about that I want to do. And I think that, and don't have time to do. And then I think that kids are one of the most sort of beautifully prepackaged ways to get fulfillment that a human being will ever find. And since I think that ultimately fulfillment is the only thing that matters for most people, it is probably the no-brainer solution to, hey, you're not fulfilled in any area of your life. Have a thriving relationship with your spouse and child, right? Yes. So the thriving part is the key, because so many people then just carry whatever dysfunction they have in the rest of their life, they carry it over to their marriage and their child. But I think that the reason, because here's my thing. I could steel man having kids so well that you would believe I had kids. Yeah. Like I could do it in a poetic form where you'd be like, fuck, this guy really gets it. Yeah. Partly because for 8 years, I was essentially a surrogate father to this kid that I big brothered for. Yeah. And to the point where when he got removed from his family because he was being abused by his single mother, and I became the guardian to help him in the court system. Like I was in this fucking kid's life. So like, I get it. Yeah. And I get it to the point of also knowing that there are parts of it that are not fun. Yeah. And so just sort of weighing everything on balance, it's like, it's probably not the choice for me.
I think the first time we met, you told me I shouldn't have kids. Not you said don't have kids. You said, hey, like you said something to the equivalent of like, think of the sacrifice that go into kids. But that's what I meant when I thought you might disagree.
Here, and I don't remember what I said, but if I know myself well enough, it would have been something along the lines of the way you think. There's something, and I say this every time we get together, so hopefully people see the consistency. There's something about the way you think I find intoxicating. You're one of my favorite authors. There's a way that you step through things logically. Also, you're just a fucking good writer. Like the way you have with a sentence is so awesome. I love it the most. So selfishly, if all you did, if I could lock you in a room and make you write the way that you write with the depth of understanding the human condition, all that, which of course would diminish, but like that is almost certainly sort of tongue in cheek. My advice would be,
I didn't take it personal at all. And look, I've done I got 2 kids. I've done 2.5 books since they were born. So I'm as far as I know, no falling
still
off.
Doing well.
Still doing it.
Yeah. Doing very well.
Yes.
Why does stillness matter?
Stillness.
What is it? How do we
stillness
get it
matters in two respects. One, when you think about your best moments of your life, they were not accomplishments. They were moments when you were locked in to a transcendent experience, another person, flow of a brilliant piece of creativity, whatever it is, right? The moments we think about, our fondest memories, are not moments when you're doing. They are almost always the absence of doing. It's, I remember when I was standing there on this beach. I remember when we used to live here. I like those walks that I used to go on. There are moments like that. Moments when I had the idea for this, when I was at the gym, and I was, things like that. So those are the wonderful moments. They are stillness embodied. They come from stillness, yet they are rare. Why would we make such a wonderful thing rare if it doesn't need to be? The second thing I would go, the best work of your life did not come from frantic busyness, right? So when I think of Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, when I think of a team, when I think of the Patriots down 28-3 in the Super Bowl, when you think of moments where people did things that we did not think was possible in an amount of time we didn't think was possible usually, what they have done is they have slowed things down. They have accessed some deeper part of themselves that they don't normally have access to. They were 100% there. That's to me what stillness is. And so I wanted to write a book about how do we cultivate it. And the interesting thing is stillness does not come from outside sources. So it's already ours. So it's much more about unlocking something we have than it is about going and getting something we don't have.
Interesting. Experientially, that doesn't, listen, I know that is true, but it doesn't feel true. So for somebody that's first coming to that idea that the stillness is already within them, because they're not going to start thinking about stillness until the chaos has long been raging, right? So shit starts happening to you when you're a little kid and your mind never shuts off. And so, and then if you have any level of ambition, like they're just the still moments, seem super rare. So they don't feel ever present and a mere uncovering of something. And then, I'll stop there.
But I mean, think about what stillness is. It's about removing. So you can't add by subtraction. So it must already be there. Do you know what I'm not saying it's not deeply covered up. I'm not saying it's locked deep inside. One of the reasons I call it a key is that we're unlocking something. It's there. There's a Zen saying, you are seeking an ox, but you are already on it. Like, the idea of you're riding the elephant, you're looking for the elephant, it's underneath you. You already got it. And so it's I think it's primarily about removing things. That's not to say that going for a walk can't induce stillness, or that journaling can't induce stillness, or that, going to therapy can't do it. That's not to say you can't work on it, but it's primarily, I don't think it's something that's, in a way, it's the most equal thing there is. It's a thing we all have the potential to have. It's not a thing that only rich people have, that only men have, whatever it is. It's just there, inherent in our biology. And what I think so interesting about this idea of stillness is like, it's one of the few things that appear in all the ancient schools and religions. The Buddhists have a word for it. The Confucius had a word for it. Marcus Aurelius talks about it. Jesus talks about it. St. Augustine talks about it. Like, everyone talks about it. Stillness is that thing. We know it when we see it. The problem is we don't see it enough.
So if you had to define exactly what stillness is, that would be useful. And then what's your favorite story in the book that illustrates this? The Cuban Missile Crisis was great. But
I mean, that would, I think I can illustrate what stillness is through that story. So you look at Kennedy goes to bed and wakes up and they're like, hey, that Cold War thing happening? Russia is currently building nuclear missiles in Cuba, 90 miles from American shores. And it's the worst news that any American president has ever gotten, right? And so he rushes to to meet with his advisors. He calls all the leaders of the armed forces. He says, what do we do? And they go, obviously, we have to blow Cuba off the map. This is the nuclear war we feared. It's here. Let's go. And Kennedy, just like a few months before, had experienced a similar thing where basically he sort of wasn't told about and then kind of gave a green light to the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. And they said, look, we got to invade Cuba through through secret means. It's going to be a lock. Let's do it. He green lights it. He doesn't really know what he's doing. They sort of bully him into it. It goes horribly. Then they bully him into escalating. It's like one of the most embarrassing moments of American history. And so you would think he would go, yep, let's do it. Time is of the essence, the world. But Kennedy goes, if we bomb Cuba, what do they do? Like, what does Russia do in response? And the generals were like, what? They like literally never thought about it. You know what I mean? Like, they were just like, no. This is, you bomb it, then you invade, and then hopefully we're still alive. Like, that was the extent. And what Kennedy's greatness was and he was a flawed man in many ways, probably would not have survived the Me Too era by any, but what Kennedy says there is he goes, no, we are going to think this through and we are going to find out a way to de-escalate this situation because he's like, I'm not even just worried about what they're going to do. I'm worried about the 9th step. He's like, because none of us will be around. It'll go and the world will be gone. Right. And he had this expression. He said, we use time as a tool, not as a couch. Meaning you don't just sit back and do nothing.
I like that.
You use time as your advantage. And what he kept saying over and over again, like he knew Khrushchev personally. He'd just been in the room with Khrushchev, and Khrushchev had basically beat the shit out of him. Khrushchev had bullied him. He thought Kennedy was weak. He'd mocked him. He'd already embarrassed him at Bay of Pigs, right? And so Kennedy could have been like, this is my chance. I'm going to get revenge. Kennedy just goes like, what's Khrushchev thinking? Why did he do this? What did he hope would happen? What's success to him in this situation? And he kept asking these questions. And then he'd go for a swim in the White House pool. Then he'd go for a walk in the White House Rose Garden. Then he'd write. We have the notes that he took as he got these briefings, and he would write things like, he'd be like, consensus. He's like, missiles. He's just thinking it through. There's a picture of a sailboat that he drew. He's doodling a sailboat. He's trying to calm himself down. And so he works through this, and basically he realizes that this isn't Khrushchev thinking he's the strong party. It's an act of weakness. Khrushchev thinks like, it's not going so well for communism. If we can humiliate the Americans, this will be good for it. He thought he could steal one. And so Kennedy goes, does he not understand how many more missiles we have? Like, does he not understand who I am? This is, and he realizes that Khrushchev has overreached, that Khrushchev had rushed into this. He had not thought about it. So he's like, we got to give these guys some time to think about this. We got to show them that they made a mistake and give them the opportunity to back out of it. So they end up putting a military blockade around Cuba. They don't attack Cuba. They go, nothing's coming in or out of Cuba. This is not happening. They go to the UN. They do some sort of political theater that is embarrassing to the Soviets. They challenge the Soviet ambassador in private, not in public, because they want them to be able to back down. Kennedy even calls it a quarantine and not a blockade, because a blockade sounds more aggressive. And there is a moment where like American ships and a Soviet submarine are like locked. They say, they're like, nuclear powers were eyeball to eyeball. The fate of humanity, this, none of us might be here, right? And Kennedy just had a sense that he had gotten it, that as tense as they were actually heading towards de-escalation. And then boom, they get like a telex or whatever, how they communicated back then, from Khrushchev. And Khrushchev's like, I think we're pulling on a rope here and we're tying the knot tighter, and eventually that knot's got to be cut. And Kennedy's like, yeah, you think? Like, what the fuck? But what Kennedy had managed to do was, through patience, through empathy, through wisdom, through an understanding of history, through a lack of self-righteousness and ego, through a mastering of his emotions, had managed to take a situation that was on the brink of catastrophic escalation, de-escalate it, but basically first not make it worse, then de-escalate it. And then when he starts talking to the Soviets, he realizes like, oh, okay, they're going to back down because they know they thought they were calling a bluff, and I proved that it's not a bluff. And he goes, and then I'm going to tell them in private, hey, once you back down here, I will remove missiles we have in Turkey that may have actually pushed you to do this in the first place, and let's solve this situation more or less permanently as well. So when I say stillness when you see it, like, I don't know if I can give you a one-sentence definition of stillness, but to me, that story is stillness. And the world would be a better place if more leaders had that stillness. I think you would be a better boss if you had it. I think I would be a better writer if I had it. I think I'd be better in traffic if I had it. Do you know what I mean? Like, everything we do is better for that stillness, because it's clarity, it's self-control, it's purpose. It's all the things that we know we want in life are made possible by having that accessing that force.
What I love is that you're defining it more than just, because I think a key part of it, and if you had asked me to define it, I would have said the mastery of your emotions.
Yeah.
But in that story, in the way that you ultimately define it in the book, it's clearly a lot more than just having control of your emotions, which is pretty interesting.
And I actually tell that story, so I split the book up. I say there's mental stillness, there's sort of emotional, spiritual stillness, and there's physical stillness. I actually put the missile crisis primarily in the mental stillness. To me, this is a problem he solved logically and rationally. Ironically, Kennedy is a guy who's in the Cuban Missile Crisis, has one of his sort of goons go pick up a girl from a nearby college that he has sex with in a hotel room. You know what I mean? Kennedy was emotionally, when I hear that, you don't go, oh, that guy, that's stillness. You think that's spiritual emptiness and awfulness, right? He thinks the world might be ending, and he's not with his family, and he's not at work. He's getting his rocks off, in a creepy way, no less. But the point is, I think you got to attack stillness from these three different fronts. But it's can you have the stillness to actually think a problem all the way through? Do you have the stillness to master your emotions? And then do you have habits and practices, and you understand your physical body well enough to have stillness there as well?
Yeah, it's interesting seeing the way that you broke down the book into those. One thing that I found interesting about this particular story is that once it all de-escalates, he actually ends up thanking the gardener of the rose garden for her role because he just kept going for walks.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because not obviously, movement, being outside, things that have a very calming, at least, effect on the mind, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Rogers would talk about this. He's when I'm angry, I go swim laps. You know what I mean? It's he's not saying I'm not angry. He's not denying that he has anger. He's a human being, but he's just look, I'd rather swim faster and then come back and not yell at the person, but talk to them nicely. You know what I mean? And so I just love the idea that, someone like Mr. Rogers, he's not just born this way. He made that is a character that he lived his whole life in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, this stillness isn't this, even if it's something we possess naturally, it does not occur naturally. We have to cultivate it just in the way that you cultivate greatness or excellence or I don't know, your singing voice.
Right. So how do we cultivate stillness?
Well, I think it's a variety of things. I mean, on the one hand, it might be what inputs, do you limit inputs? Do you have mentors? Who are your models that you're basing your life on? It might be, hey, I got an anger problem from the childhood that I have, so I'm going to go to therapy and work on that. Or it might be the sense that I've got that I wrongly have conflated in my mind, success and money. And so now money has this power over me in a way that it shouldn't. Or it might be look, you don't have any stillness because you eat terribly and you don't sleep and, you never exercise, I don't think there's not one thing you do, but you have to get it from all these different things, and they cultivate each other in the way that journaling is a physical act that calms the mind and the emotions. And the more you work through your emotions in your journal, the more logical and rational you can be.
Why'd you write a book on stillness? Why that book? Why now?
I mean, I think one, the short answer is you write whatever you're interested in. You write, like we were saying at the beginning, you write where your heart goes. It's just a pattern I was seeing, and it was something I wanted more of in my own life. And it was something I was seeing across all these different schools. When I think about an egotistical person, because the previous book in the series was Ego is the Enemy, what do they all have in common? They're frantic, they're miserable, they're roiled by these sort of this internal angst. And so just, and what do I think about what are the people in Obstacle, the people who overcame these incredible things that endured adversity that none of us most normal people couldn't get through. What do they have on the other side of that? They have this sort of incredible stillness. I think of Ulysses S. Grant. He's sitting in this room, in a room like this, posing for a photograph, and somebody steps on a skylight above him and the glass comes pouring down, and he just keeps talking. You know what I mean? Because he's exposed himself to like battle enough times. He's mastered his mental and emotional sort of, that's a guy with nerve control, and stillness and nerve control, I think, are part of the same equation.
Yeah, that the ability to get control of your biological systems, I think is really important, and really, in my life, it's been very difficult to do. And
of course, if it was easy, everyone would do it and it wouldn't be that rare.
Very, very fair. Do I remember right? Have you done or are you doing therapy?
Yeah, I go to therapy.
And to what end?
I think like I have a chapter in the book about the inner child. Like I think the reason most of us are afraid of success or incapable of having good relationships or feel angry all the time or take things personally is not us. It's like a 7-year-old inside of us, or it's whatever age that we experienced some trauma or were deprived of something that, a slightly healthier childhood would have provided for us. And so, how old, I would just urge people to think, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to give advice, but like you can read about this. There's great writers who've talked about it, but just like think about that thing that gets you really angry, or think about that thing that makes you really sad, or think about that thing that really makes you feel like a piece of shit. And go like, how old is that feeling? Not how old is it in your life, but like what age would you ascribe to that feeling? Like, so I have a lot of.
What do you mean by that?
I have like a lot of feelings where it's like I'm like a 14-year-old boy that like people aren't appreciating or seeing or loving. And then when I think back to my own childhood, that makes total sense. Like, I don't want to get too much into it, but you get what I'm saying? Sure. It's like, oh, okay. It's because there is an unloved 14-year-old inside of me. Actually, it has nothing to do with these things. I'm not saying these outside situations aren't problematic and I shouldn't resolve them. Like Judd Apatow talks about realizing that the movie studio execs who were giving him notes on his movies, he had to realize they weren't his parents. Like, these weren't his parents who were getting a divorce, telling him contradictory things about what he's allowed to do or not. That these are people who are trying to make the movie better. They might be wrong, right? The notes might be utterly stupid. He might not be under no obligation to do them, but it doesn't need to spike his heart rate, and he doesn't need to go, you can't tell me what to do. And like, it doesn't need to make him miserable, because it's just objective notes from the people who paid for the movie. It's not, fuck you, dad, and that's all that, like, daddy, look at me, fuck you, dad, or like, you're not my mom, like that energy we all have, and it pops out in less than productive ways in our lives. So if you're going to go to therapy, that would be a thing to work on.
And if you were going to package up therapy for people so they couldn't go, you're going to go on all of our behalf. What is it? What are the mechanisms that are useful? Is it just talking? Is it that your therapist has particular insights?
I mean, I think a good therapist, it depends on different schools, different training, but it's a mix of talking. And then it's like, sometimes like in inner child work, you sit and you go, that's an empty chair, and you are talking to, and for you, like, not to psychoanalyze because I'm not qualified again, but maybe you're talking to the 8-year-old fat Tom who, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, you're talking to that kid, and you're telling him what your parent should have told him, or what a teacher should have told him. So he felt good and loved and felt empowered, and that you might be able to tell him the things that you didn't learn till much later down the road.
It's interesting. When you were saying that, the first thing that popped in my mind was not something, because I definitely felt loved, certainly by my mother, who always made sure that I felt that no matter what was going on. The thing I wish somebody had done for me was push me a bit. So when you were saying like, oh, you did that and you didn't feel loved, I was actually thinking about like the time the soccer ball hit me in the leg, because Tacoma's fucking cold, and you play soccer largely in the winter, and it left the imprint of the ball on my leg, and it fucking hurt. And I was so whiny, and that I just walked off the field. And what I wish is that somebody, in an effective manner, not just to be mean to me, but that somebody had said, toughen up, basically, that being tough is valuable, right? That's what I wish somebody had conveyed to me. Not in the don't be a wuss. That's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is somebody to explain to me that suffering can be very useful. Sure. B, that being tough certainly is useful, and to have explained to me what has become arguably the most important lesson I've learned in my life, which is that you can get tougher and it's important to do so.
Oh, I totally agree. And maybe because it's supposed to be, it might be like, why didn't they do that? Right? Like, did they not think you were worth it?
Right.
Were they preoccupied by other things? Were they focused on a sibling? Like why? And did that maybe the reason that's standing out to you is that there are lots of similar situations where you really needed someone to tell you something, a not super complicated thing that should have been obvious. And instead of doing that, they just let you do whatever because they, maybe they had low expectations for you, or maybe they couldn't talk to you without arguing, or and so I'm sure it's a little bit deeper than just like, oh, why didn't you tell me to be tough?
Yeah.
But like, what? But it's more like, why didn't you? Like, not, you know what I mean? Like, why didn't you think that because I have a little bit of that too. It's like, why didn't you push me? And it's like, oh, I don't think you pushed me because you didn't think I was capable of it. And that's very sad, because if your parents aren't rooting for you, who's rooting for you? You know what I mean? And what kind of effect does that have on a person? Because you look around and the other parents, the same thing happened to another kid, and the dad did rush over and he reassured the kid and he pushed him to do it. And now, and how would that have changed the course of your life, et cetera, et cetera?
I absolutely despise how important childhood is for people. Like the amount that it influences people. Doesn't that freak you out as a parent? Like,
yeah,
God, the way that we take in information as a child is so terrifying. And the knock-on effect that you can see even in rats. Have you seen those studies where if you take a rat and you even remove it from its mother, let's say it has a mother that's it shows low affection, so it doesn't lick very often. And that rat will grow up anxious and fearful just based on how much the mom licked the rat. So they thought, okay, well, maybe it's just genetic. Maybe, mothers that have that are actually passing on something that just makes you anxious and fearful. So they took low licking rat pups, or moms that were low licking, and gave them to mothers that were high licking, and the rats grow up to be fine. So it's like, absolutely distressing to me how much our childhood imprints on us and ends up influencing a lot of the brain wiring that we have and our propensity to react in certain ways.
It is. But then you also go look at what the human experience has been able to triumph over.
Oh, don't get me wrong.
You know
On balance is fucking amazing.
Yes.
I'm just saying, like, as somebody who wants to believe that right now, today, hey, you can become whoever you want.
Yes.
When I was hearing you talk about having a conversation with the 14-year-old you in an empty chair, I was like, oh my God, the amount of work, like to unwind some of this stuff is crazy.
That is true, but also we're talking about optimizing at the margins. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying, like, my frustration with how I was raised has not prevented me from being very successful, from rising to the top of my field, to being in a happy marriage, to having my own kids. So it's more like, isn't it also annoying, like, how much like microscopic changes to our diet can affect performance, or that even like I'm in LA because I spoke to the Los Angeles Rams. Like, why do NFL coaches and players need to be inspired? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you'd think at that level, with all the money, all the energy, they've been working towards it their whole life, all this, and they still need tiny bits. So I think the good news is, like, basically anyone, no matter what you've gone through, think about the people that lived through the Holocaust or lived through slavery, or extreme disabilities. Look at what they've been able to accomplish. Again, this goes to this Marcus quote, like, if it's humanly possible, you can do it. Almost certainly whatever you and I have gone through, whatever anyone has gone through, somebody has gone through worse and managed to triumph over it. So we should take encouragement from that. And then we can go, that being said, so basically what you went through does not excuse or exempt you or keep you out of the race towards greatness. Then you're going towards greatness. You want to get there. You're going to have to eventually look under the hood and fine tune some things.
Yes. I agree with everything you said. The only thing that gives me unease and continued turmoil is some people seem so stuck. And I'll put it this way. There are people in my life who I love very much who are like, when you take and this quote actually apparently isn't Mother Teresa, but is so often attributed to her, I always just give her the credit. No one will act for the many, but people will act for the one. So it's like, for all the things that I do, trying to impact people at scale, I come back to the people I'm closest to that I love, that I'm trying to like find the way to help them.
Right. Ultimately, you write a book for one person.
Correct.
Because it's the only thing you can really wrap your hands around.
Right. And I can't figure out, some of the people that I'm closest to, I can't figure out how to help them past whatever happened to them in their childhood that has them stuck, that gave them a frame of reference that is disempowering, that not only a frame of reference, but like a neurochemical reward system where they just continue to make decisions that do not serve them. And it's like, how the fuck do you get them past that?
Yeah. And maybe it's not something you control, and it's gonna unlock itself. Do you know, like, not saying
it's not.
No.
Some people are never going to get unlocked.
No. What I'm saying is, like, there's a Zen expression: when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yes.
And maybe you're not the teacher, or you're not the teacher at this moment. You know what I mean? It may be that a hurricane's got to move the boulder a little bit, and then it's possible to be pushed by humans.
Yeah. I don't think you're bothered by that reality, because I totally acquiesce to the truth of that.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem to bother you at quite the level that it bothers me.
Yeah. But look, at the core of Stoicism is ultimately like, not that you focus on yourself at the expense of other people, but you ultimately go, if it's not in my control right now, it's not in my control right now. Being upset about it doesn't do anything. Being sad about it doesn't do anything. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm not being blasé, but I am being, I'd rather move on than despair.
Yeah. It's one of those where that is the absolute right answer. And yet I find that some of what drives me is probably what is an artificial carrot. It is almost certainly true that some people I'm never going to be able to impact, and I accept the truth of that. And yet being inspired to try to find a way to take the hardest case of people that I care about and say, I want to find a way, because if I can impact this sort of at the extreme hard case, then all the people that are in the middle, then I will have been able to help.
Well, look, you probably like this quote. I don't know the beginning, but basically the idea is like, all progress depends on the irrational man, right? The person who believes they can pull the impossible thing off, it's ultimately what does it. That doesn't mean that it's great to be the irrational man, That doesn't mean it's fun to be the irrational man. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be the irrational man. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, and I think we do. I think, oh God, I don't know if this is me now trying to put my value system onto other people, but I really think that being the irrational man is the only right answer. And that, oh God, you have to have a whole host. All of my reactions right now are, the reason that I'm writing a book is because when I go to give somebody an Instagram answer to a question, I'm always like, I'm lying to them because I'm oversimplifying this, and that the reality is so fucking complicated that the only way to capture this is to really write the whole book. So when I think about, like, okay, being the irrational man, allowing yourself to believe that anything is possible. So you have beliefs. Beliefs are part of the formula, but values are part of the formula. Why values? Because values are what you ultimately hardwire into yourself to get a neurochemical response from pursuing the things, because pursuit is all you have. You may never achieve it. So if the pursuit isn't fun, if it isn't deeply fulfilling, there's no reason to pursue it. But as somebody who once lavished in my emotional weakness and thought there was no problem with it, and saw myself as Solieri, which I'm assuming is a reference you will get. And I lived there, and almost I found identity in it, for sure, in being like, I'm just smart enough to realize how much smarter other people are. And like, I thought that there was something interesting to that. And then entirely changed my value system, no longer allowed myself to worship at the altar of weakness, began to hold myself to a different standard, but not so I could self-flagellate myself. I don't beat myself up when I'm weak about something. I'm like, hey, I'm going to push myself because I know the depths of fulfillment of sincere pursuit. It doesn't matter whether I actually accomplish it. Just, am I really, really trying this, or am I just giving rhetoric to the fact that I'm trying? And as long as I know that I'm really, really trying, it's very interesting. So I believe that, so you've got the beliefs, you've got values, that's part of it. But then there's even like habits, routines, the default network of the brain, like rewiring yourself so that you actually get a neurochemical response for pursuing things that are difficult. So for instance, I fucking hate cold showers, but I do them because they make me feel better about myself. What'd you say?
I took one this morning.
You and I both.
Yeah.
So
I get what you're saying. Writing a book is like on the scale of a rational man thinks. Writing a book to help people is like the lowest of the low. You know what I mean? Like, but trying to individually save every person, probably. You know what I mean? I guess what I'm saying is like, look, I'm glad I live in a world of Elon Musks. I don't want to be that Elon Musk. I want to be a different version of Elon Musk. You know what I mean? And Elon Musk's a bad example. It's like, look, we benefit from the horrible murderous conquerors who settled this country, right? That doesn't mean that what they did was great. You know, that doesn't mean I would go murder millions of Indians, but like I certainly benefit from it. So the history and society progress depends on the irrational man in that sense, but you got to decide who you're going to be.
What do you hope people take away from Stillness is the Key?
I hope they think better. I think they find some. I think they improve their soul, and then I hope they improve their spirit and body. Like I hope it's sort of a holistic way to improve their life, because I don't think greatness is really greatness if it comes at the expense of misery or happiness or your ability to even recognize that you've achieved greatness, right? Like Billie Jean King, the tennis great, she was saying like, look, like the relentless desire to improve and to never be satisfied with your performance is what makes a champion. But it also prevents a champion from realizing or even enjoying or even realizing that they are a champion. Do you know what I mean? And so to me, greatness, true greatness is to have done it, maybe not with the dark energy, right? To have accomplished it and be happy, to have greatness and success, maybe to bring that back to where we were earlier. And that's what I'm hoping to get people. Like I would just, maybe it's a fantasy of mine, but I would just love the idea that like I would love Hemingway, who doesn't kill himself at the end, who basically doesn't abuse women, who is a good father. I don't see why the work and the monster have to exist simultaneously. And so ultimately I think it's a book about how do you get the things you want in a better way.
Man, I think that's a profoundly cool thing to want. And I like the way that you explain it, that the greatness and the monster don't have to coexist. There's something interesting about Kanye West, though, that when I look at that, and look, I don't know the guy at all. So this is me cobbling together things from the outside, but hearing some of the things that he said about like taking medicine, I don't know what other word to use for it, to try to regulate his emotions and everything, then made him numb and made it impossible for him to create.
Sure.
There is something to that. And I don't believe in the torture genius. I certainly, I have achieved success without torture or genius. Yeah. So that doesn't, that doesn't seem like prerequisites.
Right.
But it's a fine line to walk between, you can see how the madness when it comes in just the right way. And I use that, I guess, in a colloquial way. I don't mean literal madness, but the like where you're sort of existing outside of the confines of the way that other people think and limit themselves in ways that they don't even realize they're limiting themselves, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And look, maybe Kanye's a better example than Elon Musk. I'm glad to live in a world of Kanye. I'm glad I don't live in Kanye's world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't want to live in his head, you know? Look, Donald Trump being Donald Trump made him president. Would you trade places with him?
No.
Not a political thing. I'm saying, would you live in Donald Trump's brain if it meant you got to be president?
Right.
Almost no one would take that trade. And so it's like but right under Kanye West, there's all sorts of other musicians who are not, and that's why I think the argument, it's so hard. I guess we're asking like what scales, because, okay, sure, we're for Kanye, but like, I mean, most musicians don't have that problem. You know what I mean? Like, most musicians are able to be super creative and create brilliant things, and they don't have to storm the stage of the Grammys, and like they don't have to say these things. So I guess, why is it on us to prove that like, maybe it's on him to prove that actually we can't have one without the other.
What's interesting to me is like, I think maybe a slightly different question is the right question, which is, how do you step outside of the perspective that the world has to see things anew, whether it's Elon Musk, who I think is extraordinarily good at that, of saying, like, so many people would say, well, I can't be a rocket scientist because I didn't go to engineering school. And he's like, but you can read the books, and as long as you can understand it and you recognize sort of the laws of physics and you adhere to them, like, as long as it doesn't violate the laws of physics, then I can figure it out. Or Kanye with music, the same thing, or Jay-Z with what he's done with both business and music, of just being able to step outside. We're constantly constructing our vision of the world. And this is one of my own personal obsessions. In fact, this is largely what was driving my desire to do this show, is like, I want to get farther and farther outside of the way that other people view the world, so that I can do something new and different, because the way that everybody is seeing things, the way that I've been seeing things, like, in fact, this will be the easiest way to sum this up. My current skill set has already taken me as far as it's going to take me. And said another way, my current perspective has already taken me as far as it's going to take me. So now, how do I begin to knock myself askew? And so often people need some sort of life-changing event, becoming a parent, the death of a loved one, like something that allows them the freedom of, I'm no longer beholden to the way that people see me, or I'm no longer beholden to their framework of the world. And bear with me one more second. So I just had Molly Bloom on Impact Theory. Do you know who Molly Bloom is?
The poker player?
Yeah. Well, I guess technically not the poker player, but she she built the game. And she was talking about how when she got arrested, and there were 17 federal agents, machine guns on her, flashlights in her face, and she was like, there was so much freedom in, I had failed in front of the entire world. And so all of the things that had been just closing in on me for years, the need to succeed, the need to prove people wrong, the need, because her brothers, I guess, are both prodigies. One was a 2-time Olympic medalist, I think, and then played in the NFL. Really? And her other brother, her other brother is a Harvard-trained cardiothoracic surgeon. And so she just felt invisible in her family growing up. And so
inner child shit we were just talking about. Yeah,
exactly. And so she was like, all of a sudden, like that frame of reference, she didn't use those words, but that frame of reference that she had built that said she had to do and be all of these things, it shattered into a million pieces. And rather being sort of the lowest of the low moments, or I'm sure it was briefly, but she said then it was like, it was freedom.
Yeah.
And what I want to get to is, okay, I really have no interest in being a torture genius. Like, so if you said to me, hey, you can have genius, but it comes at the expense of torture, I would say, no, I'm just fine. Like, because I know fulfillment at the end of the day is really the only thing that matters. And hopefully that I'm always shocked at how unself-evident that is, that feeling profoundly and unshakably good.
Yes.
Nothing is forever. Even fulfillment is it sort of ebbs and flows, but having that sort of anti-fragile, like, I do hard things, I contribute to this world, I'm constantly trying to improve. I can feel that my ego is not built around anything fragile. It's not built around being good or better or smart or anything like that. It's, learning and helping and all of those things. That is all that matters. So
to me, that would be a fantastic definition of stillness.
Interesting.
That's what equanimity means, the inability to to be shaken. The Stoic word for it is apatheia, when you're not jerked around by any of these external things. The Epicureans called it ataraxia. Like all that's what enlightenment is. That's what nirvana is, right? That like you get there. That and so I think that's what I'm saying. So we think stillness is this sort of this absence, this weakness, it's laying back. I think it's the opposite of that. It's like really getting in there. And like what you're saying with Molly, I think it's we all have those moments. I think ideally, if we're looking at a scalable strategy, we're like, okay, how can we get that flash of insight from a source other than 17 federal agents because you've been running, you know what I mean? Because like it's really about what happens next that's important. So can we get there from reading a book? Can we get there from therapy? Can we get there from a mentor? Can we get there from maybe it's psychedelics? Can we get there from doing work? You know, do we have to blow up our lives? I'm very anti-psychedelics.
Really?
Yes.
Have we talked about this?
No.
Tell me more.
I have my two flip answers are I haven't heard anyone tell me anything from psychedelics that I haven't seen in basically every rudimentary philosophical text, you know? And two, I would like to know from any point in human history where a magical drug or pill was able to fix any spiritual issue for any person at any sustainable level. What
do you think about the new trials and stuff for MDMA usage for PTSD and stuff like that?
And those would be the two instances where I'm not only not opposed to it, but I'm very for it because treatment-resistant depression, you're already trying really difficult drugs. PTSD, something profoundly bad has happened to you. So the idea that you'd be willing to gamble some things to fix it, totally for, especially if it's being done in a medical setting, you know, by people who know what they're doing. What I'm really starting to get worried about is people who are not doctors, who are sort of freely prescribing, you know, transformative medical experiences as a magical solution to really profound issues that people have. So I would love for the medical community to do what the medical community is going to do. I just don't like this idea that like we should be like tweeting and, you know, making videos about it. It just makes me nervous. I don't have any judgment for anyone who's talking about it or doing it. It just makes me very nervous because like historically, I just don't see a lot of precedents for that ending well. Usually it blows up in everyone's face. And we are living in a time where like, because a lot of this mentality is coming from Silicon Valley, where Silicon Valley, through some of those thinking, has kicked out some important legs of the stool on which society depends. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, now this is getting really interesting.
I don't know. Oh, it's like what if the internet can replace our relationships with other people, or like what if we can just have an app that fixes this problem? And then we're like, oh wait, you basically blew up the civilized world. You know what I'm saying?
Do you think that's actually happening?
I just mean like we can't even agree on what reality is anymore, and I think social media has largely exacerbated that, if not created the problem to begin with.
So you have a son.
Yes.
One of the reasons that I am glad I don't have kids, if you had given me immersive virtual sex as a teenager, I would never have left.
I'm not sure who would have.
So that one, that scares me. I am so glad that we didn't have the internet when I was a teenager. I worry about how many hours I would have lost to porn.
Yeah, it would be insane. Or just like, can you imagine? I don't have a daughter, but like, can you imagine being
Wait, you're second? Aren't you?
I have two boys.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, for some reason, I thought for sure you had a daughter recently.
No, if I had a daughter, and then it's like a problem for boys too. But to be a 13-year-old girl is already a deeply insecure, overwhelming experience where you feel like you're being judged, where you feel like you don't measure up, you know, all these things. I can't imagine adding Instagram to that experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like that's just
terrifyingly
horrific.
So. Yeah.
Like you already nobody thinks adults don't think they look good in pictures.
Right.
What does a 13-year-old what business does a 13-year-old have managing a modeling account for herself, which is essentially what Instagram is. And it, like, look, models have always gone through this, and so celebrities and, you know, public people. But we used to pay people a lot of money. Like, I have a social media account, and I have to deal with the fact that people say mean things, or I post something that I thought was cool and people didn't like it. But I get paid a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like, I'm compensated for this. A 16-year-old is not.
Yeah, man. I'm conflicted, because when I think about the people that I have had access to, the ideas that I've had access to because of the internet, because of social media, when I think about the fact that I have essentially dedicated my adult life and my fortune to helping people via social media. So it's like there's tremendous upside, but for kids, fuck.
My work would not have broken through without social media. And so, and you know, as problematic as the internet has been, it was also a wonderful experience for me. Like, I remember, you know, getting the internet. I got an email address in maybe like 5th grade, and I was very early to it. But this world was very different than the world that I existed in which my parents did not understand me, in which I was not particularly sort of believed in or pushed. Like, I was, oh my God, there's this world out here with more people like me in it. And so there's wonderful things. And a lot of, so even as an adult, a good chunk of, I had dinner last night with someone that who I found out liked my work from social media, and it was awesome. You know what I mean? Like, this is not just a random person, it's an interesting person, but like, you know, like the point is, like, there's so many pros, there's just also a lot of downsides.
Yeah, fuck. All right, so let's go back to what's going on in Silicon Valley. So,
yes.
In what way is it just the experiment with the internet and apps that you're saying is kicking out the leg?
I just mean, like, you know, I just feel like this is probably getting into just like lame social commentary, but it's just like, weren't these people just telling us that Bitcoin was going to replace money, which created an enormous financial bubble? You know, weren't these people just telling us that polyamory was the future of relationships? You know what I mean? Like, what is Tinder and these other apps done to the dating world? It's just, not everything needs to be disrupted, you know? And there are always consequences and unintended consequences for the things that we do. And I think we're just, the problem is the unintended consequences come far enough down the road. And so I just wish there was a little bit more intellectual humility from these people who are talking about how they found a plant in the Amazon rainforest that is all upside and no downside.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I have a very weird relationship with drugs. So I'm super, probably afraid is the right word. So I didn't have my first drink of alcohol until I was 26.
Wow.
And I probably wouldn't have even done that if I hadn't met my wife. And she was like, no, come on. Like, this will be fun. Let's do it together. Yeah. I don't have an addictive personality. So I don't have a fear of becoming addicted. What I have is a fear of, I always had a fear of doing anything that would fuck up my brain. Yeah, like, I'm just super psychotic about that. I've tried microdosing, and it didn't do anything for me. And because I worry enough about doing things in my brain, but I've never gone all the way to, you know, some transformative experience. And then at the same time, as a writer, I was writing this scene in Neon Future, which is the comic book that we created. And I wrote about a guy, and I really wanted him to have like this, a moment that shifted his consciousness, that not in some grand psychedelic way, just like a little bit, like look at things just a little bit. And my natural reaction was to have him do drugs. Yeah. Because it works. Yeah. Like, when I think about when I drink, which I don't do very often, but when I drink, it's like, I feel like I'm suppressing the urge to dance on a table. And that is a wonderful feeling, right? So I drink on occasion with my wife, and we get into like this little cocoon. Like, the reason that this shit lives on and it lingers and all that is because it actually does something. Sure. And so for somebody that, one, I'm super keen to try MDMA. Yeah. I want to do it with my wife. I don't want to do it in a clinical setting. Yeah. But I think that would be fucking awesome.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think it's also, again, this is a little flip, but like, if it was so transcendent and transformative, why do they have to do it multiple times?
That's fair. And I've heard people give that criticism, like, hey, this isn't something that you should be doing over and over and over. This is
right. And yet because I think that is the nature of drugs. And I'm not trying to say like, oh, it's a gateway drug, you're going to get addicted. But the nature of drugs is you are getting the thing without the work for the thing, right? And very rarely do you tell humans, here's a shortcut, take the long, and then they take the long way. That's just not how we're wired, right? You know, you want the shortcut all the time.
Do you meditate?
Not really.
Interesting.
I tried to write a book about stillness without invoking or talking about meditation very much because, you know, Ramit Sethi talks about how like, look, people aren't going to make budgets. They're just not going to make budgets. So don't tell them to make budgets because you're already setting them up to fail. And so I wanted to talk about stillness from a variety of other angles that would make their life tangibly better, that would not require them to do a thing that either they're not cut out to do or they're not willing to do. And if they are cut out for it, well, there's like 8 trillion books about that.
Yeah. Because of the physiological, what I call physiological hooks, I think meditation is quite literally something every single human being should do. Now, if you do it and then you reject it, hey, fine, fair enough. Like if you know how to diaphragm breathe and get yourself out of the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic, but it's one of those where thankfully I discovered meditation probably about 4 years ago. And then I went through a brutally stressful time in my life. It was fucking crazy. And when I think about if I hadn't had meditation during that period, like, whoa, that legitimately, I worry about the toll that would have taken on me had I not been able to de-escalate my nervous system.
Yeah, no, I tend to find that I get that meditative experience from walking, from swimming, from getting into flow states from other things. But, if I could, if the times that I tried it, it worked very well for me, I'd be doing it all the time.
Right.
Just haven't been able to get there.
Super interesting. All right, man. Where should people find you? Where should they find the book?
Yes.
Which is rad.
Okay. Stillness is the Key, available everywhere books are sold. You can follow me. I'm at Ryan Holiday. But
I won't actually reach you, will I?
Usually no. I don't even really check them. But then there's RyanHoliday.net. And then if you're interested in the stoicism stuff we're talking about, there's dailystoic.com, which is a free email that goes out every day. And then if you can't even do an email, there's at Daily Stoic on Instagram, which is a quote from the Stoics every day to think about.
And then the thing that you should be promoting, which I'm startled that you were not, is the Daily Stoic on YouTube.
Oh, yes.
Which is one of the only platforms that matter, in my opinion. And
it is the most underrated of all the social networks.
It's going to rule the world soon enough, I promise you. It is so much better algorithmically than everything else that's out there as a content creator. If you're creating content, you're not on fucking YouTube, you're out of your mind. And the stuff that you're doing on YouTube is rad.
Thank you. Yeah, so, I guess it's youtube.com/dailystoic.
Get after it. Yeah. My man, thank you so much for coming on the show. Anytime you have something to promote, I'd love to sit down with you.
Done.
Again, I love the way that your mind works. So
awesome.
When you're here, stop by.
Cool.
Everybody, thanks for joining us for Conversations with Tom.
The Stoics would say, prepare for the day ahead, and then you're supposed to reflect on the day that just passed. And so that sort of process of preparing in the morning and reviewing in the evening allows me to never get too far from where I want to be.